Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you guys for standing by. Welcome to today's event in the ReadyTalk webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled, I'm Ready to Do a Webinar, Now What? We're joined by a couple of experts on the subject today, Mathew Sweezey from Pardot. He's our Marketing Automation Evangelist there, and Mike McKinnon, who is the Senior Marketing Operations Manager here at ReadyTalk, actually. So I'll let each of them give a quick overview of themselves when I hand it over, but a couple of housekeeping items beforehand. During today's presentation, everybody's going to be in a listen-only mode. However, if you guys do have any questions at any time, please feel free to chat those in the chat box, which is located in the lower left-hand portion of your screen. We'll be sure to get to all those, or as many as we can, I should say, during the Q&A portion of today's event. If by chance we can't get to all of them because you're such an interactive audience, we'll be sure to have somebody follow up with you directly after the webinar. Also, if you guys are on Twitter or involved in the social sphere, please feel free to carry on the conversation there as well. Today's hashtag is RTWebinar, and you can see all of our presenters' Twitter handles there also. One last reminder is today's event is being recorded Wednesday, October 17th, and you guys will all get that link to the recording in a post-event email a little bit later on today, along with a PDF of the slides as well. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mike McKinnon to kick off today's event.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks for everyone coming today. So I am, as Simone said, I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing Operations at ReadyTalk. So I'm involved on a day-to-day effort of making sure our processes align with the way we run webinars and our demand gen campaigns, making sure leads are getting assigned properly, making sure they're flowing through our webinar service, into our marketing automation service, and into our CRM properly and being tagged properly. Today, we're going to talk to you about the back end of a webinar and then the front end. I'm going to go over some basic stuff you need to consider when you're beginning a webinar, such as setting objectives, metrics, processes, and details. And then Matt's going to take it, and he's going to go over promotion, presentation day, webinar follow-up. So we'll be splitting the presentation into those two pieces. So the first thing you want to start with, like any demand gen initiative, is you want to actually set objectives. And setting these objectives will help you guide, one, your success metrics, and also help you guide your processes, the speaker that you choose, the title, the abstract, all of that. So everything really comes out of the objectives. So you want to make sure you do a really good job of sitting down and talking with your marketing team, your sales team, your training team, your customer service team, whoever really you're doing this webinar for, and looking at the objectives you want to get out of it. And that way you can go back at the end and you can say, okay, this is what we wanted to do. How do we measure against these objectives? And like I said earlier, the objectives are also going to guide the process that you use, the abstract that you use, the topic that you use, the speaker that you choose. So it really all starts with objectives. Before I get started, I just want to take a really quick poll of the audience to see who is actually running webinars now, who's thinking about running them, and who has done them a ton and is professional at them. So if you can just quickly give some responses, that'd be great. Okay, looks like we kind of have both extremes. So there we go. Some professional webinar people here, and then some people that really are looking to get best practices and start their journey into webinars, which is great. So hopefully we have some questions along both ends of the spectrum. So let's start with what we talked about, objectives. There's all these reasons why you would do a webinar. You can do them for thought leadership. You can do them for demand generation. You can do them for online training. You can do them for customer service. I just threw up three of the most common here. And the most common really are the marketing departments doing thought leadership, branding and promotion, or demand gen, where we're looking at number of registrants to inquiries, inquiries to leads, leads to ops, and that kind of pipeline metrics. Or we have our training as well. We have a training department here as well, and we run webinars to train our customers on our products. And we'll have, depending on what objective you have, you're going to have different primary metrics that you're going to want to track. So for instance, our demand generation webinars always come back to revenue build. And we use a common objective, a common metric for us is they must generate X amount of revenue within 12 months of the webinar date. Because here we're a reoccurring revenue model. So people will bill every month, and we want to make sure that after a year has gone by, they've actually generated a certain amount of revenue once they get up and billing. For someone that doesn't maybe have a recurring revenue model, your revenue objective might be different, but it might still look something like this. A thought leadership objective might be to generate 500 downloads of a research brief in 6 months. So maybe you have a speaker that wrote a book or a research brief, and that research brief reflects directly upon your company, a benefit that your company can offer. So you'll have this person speak, and then you want to track how many downloads of this brief that they drove. Another objective we use here for our training team is, how much are our training webinars reducing the support burden on our support team? So we try to quantify that. Of course, every objective comes with a primary metric and a secondary metric. We just went over the primary metrics, and there are a bunch of different secondary metrics that you might want to track depending on your objective. And now these secondary metrics are a nice way of counting things. Here at ReadyTalk, what we do is we look at our primary objective. If we haven't hit it, we'll go back and look at our secondary objectives to see where the ball was dropped and why we didn't hit the primary objective. And let me use our demand gen objective as an example. So obviously our primary objective is the revenue build. If we hit that, everyone's happy, everyone's great, the webinar's a success. If we don't hit that, we need to go back and look at some of our secondary objectives, and we need to look at how many people registered and what was that registrant to attendee conversion rate, how many people attended. Of the people attended, how many actually raised their hand, how many chatted, how many net new leads from that webinar went into our database, and how many opportunities were created. If any of those numbers are lower than expected, you can see where the break point happens. So it really all starts at the very, very top with registration, then attendance, and then hand raisers, and then opportunities created. So it's kind of a waterfall, and you're basically counting all the way down that waterfall to see where something maybe went wrong. So for this instance, maybe we didn't hit our primary objective because while our registration rate was great, our attendance rate was below 50%. We only had 10% of the people show up. So right there, you're starting behind the 8 ball. You have very few people attending, so therefore you're going to have very few people raising their hand on the event. You're going to have very few net new names into your database, and as a result, you'll have very few opportunities created. So that's just one example of primary and secondary. I threw a bunch up here for the different objectives. I'm not going to go into them, but you can see the main point that you want to know is that you'll have a primary objective with a primary metric, and then you're going to have a secondary metrics that kind of add up to that primary metric. And you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't want too many. I would say stick with one primary metric and maybe 3 to 5 secondary metrics that all support that primary metric. And again, you're going to want to sit down with the team that you're building this webinar for. For us, in our demand gen case, it's always sales. We're building these webinars for sales, and we'll get feedback as to how those metrics are doing as the event progresses up to the day of the event, and after the event, we're continually tracking that stuff. So once you decide on your objective, you really need to bring 3 disparate parts together in order to have a successful webinar. And those, I just like to call them briefly. You have your process piece of the webinar, you have the content piece of the webinar, and then you have the technology piece of the webinar. And we're going to go all into these one by one, but at a very high level, all of these are driven by your objective, as I stated earlier. So that's why it's very important to do the objective first, because the process that you follow will want to support that objective. The content that you use is obviously going to support that objective. If your objective is to generate demand and close sales, you're not going to have a webinar on, and let me use us as an example, ReadyTalk as an example. We do a lot of webinars on, like this one, webinar best practices, because just by the very nature of someone attending or registering, it lets us know that this person is either doing webinars, they're attempting to do them, or they're going to start doing them. And that's right away we're qualifying people. So it would make no sense at all for me to go out and have a webinar on social media to generate demand for my sales team. Because the people that attend that social media webinar, we don't do social media. That's not going to qualify anyone. So it doesn't make sense to have content that doesn't speak to your objective. And then, of course, the final piece is the technology, and that involves what webinar service you're going to use, also what CRM you're going to use, what marketing automation tool you're going to use, all of these different technologies that kind of bring an event together. How are they going to interface with each other? So that's the other piece. So process, content, and technology. And we're going to go over these in detail one by one. And we're going to start with process first. If I can just get it pop up. There we go. So obviously, like I said earlier, your process wants to support your objective. So again, I'm going to go back to the demand gen objective as an example. So we're going to look at the demand gen, and we're going to say, okay, what type of process is going to support generating demand for a sales team? So where are we going to send the email out of? What is that email going to look like? Is the email going to come out of our webinar service? Or is it going to come out of our marketing automation service? What's that process going to look like? Or is it going to come out of our CRM? Because all three of these technologies are able to send emails. When someone registers, what happens? Do they get a confirmation with a white paper? Do they get a confirmation in a phone call? A day before the event, weeks leading up to the event, what are you going to do to these people? Are you going to have the sales team call them and remind them? How many times are they going to remind them? How many reminders are you going to send? All that kind of stuff. It goes into the process piece. If someone requests more information, how are they going to be followed up on? If someone opts into your newsletter, how is that going to be handled? So all of these pieces need to come together with the process. You need to think through them all. For a demand gen webinar, obviously, we want to get people that raise their hand to the right salesperson assigned by territory immediately. So we have processes in place to do that. The minute someone registers, they check the box to be contacted. We have processes on the back end that assign that person based on territory, set a task for our AE to call them, and also send an email to the AE saying, hey, someone you own in your territory just requested more information. Please contact them. All that happens within a matter of 15 minutes, 20 minutes, so that call can happen the same day. That's an example of a process that supports your objective. Because obviously, someone that raises their hand, you want to contact them immediately. There's a research piece done by the Harvard Business Review, and it came out last year when they did research on the time it takes for you to follow up with an inquiry. And they said after an hour, your chances of having a quality conversation drop, I think it's by 10 every hour thereafter. So if you don't call them immediately, the chance of having a quality conversation, and a quality they defined as, they'll pick up the phone, they remember that they requested more information, because everyone knows the AE that calls 3 days later, and they say, hi, you requested more information, I'm giving you a call, and that person has no idea. I don't remember requesting more information, I don't remember this. So you want to have it within 24 hours ideally, at worst within 24 hours, ideally within the hour. And that's an example of a process that supports an objective. Another piece of the process piece, and I want to do a really quick poll of our attendees is, what systems are you going to use? Are you going to use your CRM, your marketing automation tool, and the webinar service all together? So before I go into that piece, I just want to get a really quick take on what technologies people in the audience are using today. So if you just check all the ones that apply, and we'll just get a feel for what people are using. Great. So it looks like obviously a lot of people use Salesforce, which is not a surprise. And then we have kind of a split between Eloqua and Pardot as a marketing automation tool, and some people are using HubSpot as well, which is not a surprise. It's got a pretty big user base. So now that you have your process in place, now you want to think about what systems are going to handle these processes. So are you going to take registrations? ReadyTalk is integrated into Pardot. So now you can use Pardot to collect a registration and then integrate that into ReadyTalk and have ReadyTalk send out a confirmation. So you can do things like that now because these pieces are integrated. So where are you going to have your registrations taken? Are you going to have them taken in Pardot? Or are you going to have ReadyTalk do it, or WebEx, or GoDo, or whatever? Or are you going to have your Salesforce instance do it, or HubSpot do it? Where are these going to be taken? Where are the invites coming from? where is the form being hosted, where are the reminders coming from, where the post-event emails come from, how are they being routed to the sales team if need be. So this is all the things you need to think about. Are you going to use your marketing automation system at all? Or maybe you're just going to use your webinar platform in your CRM and you're going to do a manual upload and download of a CSV file. If you're integrated, if you're using a tool like Pardot, you can eliminate that manual work. So one, that speeds up the process, so you're not waiting for someone to pull a spreadsheet down and clean it and scrub it and then upload it and map it. It's all automated for you, so that allows your sales team to follow up on a inquiry much faster. Again, that's a process supporting an objective. So maybe that's something you want to do. Or maybe you decide that this is all thought leadership, and we're not going to use our CRM at all because they're not really actionable leads. They're just downloading a white paper. So our CRM isn't really going to come into play. We're going to keep everything in Pardot. And when someone downloads a white paper, they're going to go into Pardot. We're going to throw them in a nurture track, and we're going to keep circulating them around until they actually have a stronger call to action, like a demo or a free trial, and then we'll send them to Salesforce. So those are the things you need to talk about and think about when you're putting together a process. What technologies do you want to use? Which ones will best support your objectives? And how to then get them to all work together. It's not a simple process if you're new to this, but it's definitely something that you want to sit down and talk about thoroughly and think about all the advantages and disadvantages of using one tool over another. And also when you're out there, maybe looking at purchasing a new tool, you want to look at how does that tool fit into I'm going to be using this new tool for my webinars. So how does it fit into my objectives? What my webinar objectives dictate that this tool must have A, B, C, D, and E. And that's kind of how you want to think about it. So that's the process piece. And then we're going to move into the content piece here. And again, I'm going to reiterate this many times. You want this piece as well to support your objective. So when you're choosing a speaker, you want to look at their reach, their experience, where are their area of expertise? Do they have name recognition? Have they written a book? That's always great. Are they on a speaker tour? Will the very fact that they're on your webinar, will that bring people to your webinar? And is that a good thing? Or maybe it's a bad thing because they have name recognition that really has nothing to do with the benefit your webinar is trying to provide. So they'll bring a bunch of unqualified leads into that webinar, and one, it's going to clog up it's going to create noise around the actual qualified leads to your account executive team. And we've had this happen to us where we've had a speaker come in, they're kind of secondarily related to the topic we're running, and then when we do our follow-up, our post-event follow-up, we get a bunch of opt-outs because the people didn't come because of the topic. They came because of the speaker, because they follow that speaker everywhere. So you want to be really sure that when you do bring in a speaker, that if they do have name recognition, that's a good thing, and it supports your objectives. So don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole. One of the things we always do is we ask the speakers, do you have an opt-in database yourself? What does it look like? What's the makeup of that? If we're doing a demand gen webinar and our ideal customer profile for that webinar is the marketer who runs webinars and their database is filled with IT professionals, obviously it's not a good fit. And we don't want to bring the noise of a bunch of IT professionals onto a webinar that's targeting marketers. So you really want to have a really open and honest conversation with your speaker to make sure that they can support the objectives that you have. Another part of the content is the title and the abstract. And I've done a webinar on this in the past. And here at ReadyTalk, we try to be boring. Boring in our event titles, boring in our abstracts. And here's the reason why. And what I do is I go through several of these titles and abstracts. And you have the clever, the concise, and the cute. The clever is the first one. It's clever, it sounds great, but I don't really know what it's about. What does that mean without working light? What are effective headlines? The cute, power, peril, protocol, all that alliteration, what does that mean? What is the peril of email communication? What's the power? So what you're trying to avoid is having a cute or clever title driving registrants to your webinar, and they're actually registering for something else. So you're misleading them with the title and the abstract because it's cute or clever, and they register, and that does several things. One, they'll probably drop off. Two, you might get some bad feedback saying this is not what was promised. And three, even worse, I consider it the worst, is your AEs come back to you and they say, all these people that are on this webinar are not qualified at all because they all thought it was about something else. And it's your fault because you wrote the abstract wrong and you wrote the title wrong, and you basically you tricked these people into registering for the webinar. So the middle here is concise, and that's really what you want to get at. Webinar, how to plan, design, and deliver an effective virtual event. It's bland, it's boring, but no one's going to register for that thinking it's about social media. They're going to register for it knowing that it's going to be about how to design, deliver, and plan a virtual event. And that's really what you want to get at. As a marketer, it's really, really easy for us to jump into this cute and clever wordplay type brainstorming, and we kind of want to stay away that with webinars because you really want to have only qualified traffic coming into your webinar. And then finally, obviously another piece of the content is not only the content of the webinar, but any assets that are around the webinar. Are you offering people a white paper before the event for registering? Are you giving them a book, a signed book? Maybe if they attend, they get a book. Maybe after the event, they get a case study or some testimonials or a white paper. So again, you want to think about all the things, all the content you have in your content repository, and look at which ones will support the objectives the best. Again, going back to the demand gen piece, it might make sense if you're running a webinar on demand gen that at the end of that you send them a white paper on top 10 things you need to do to get started immediately. Or if they attend, because really you do want to drive attendance, because once they're attending, you can get polling and chat data on them, more behavioral data. Maybe if they attend, they get a signed book by the speaker or something like that. So you definitely want to look at all the assets surrounding the event and use those to the best of your ability. Give some away for attending, give some away for registering, give some away post-event, blog about some later, and use them all as kind of an integrated campaign. And every piece of content supports the anchor campaign, which is the webinar. And then finally, the technology piece. And this is the often most overlooked piece, but it really can be the most important piece of any webinar, because if you have a speaker that doesn't know how to use the technology, no matter how good your content is, no matter how on point they are, and how great they are at speaking, if they're fumbling around the technology, pushing the wrong slides, muting themselves by accident, hitting buttons on the call, saying a lot of ums and ahs, and there's background noise and all this kind of stuff, it's going to reflect poorly on, unfortunately, it reflects poorly on your company. People do not, although your company might be using WebEx, for example, as a conferencing service, if that WebEx bombs for some reason, and maybe it's completely WebEx's fault, it still reflects poorly on your company. People do not separate those two out, so you want to make sure that if your speaker is new to the technology, that they get properly trained on how to use it, how to use the polling, how to use the markup tools, how to use the chat, how to push slides back and forth, and all that kind of stuff. Because if they use it poorly, it's going to reflect poorly on your company, and you'll probably get some poor feedback. So some of the things we do to make sure this goes properly is we have dry runs, we have practice sessions, we'll go over content with the speaker, and also when we're vetting the speaker at the beginning, remember we a couple of slides before we talked about choosing a speaker, we're going to want to make sure they've done virtual events before, webinars before. If they haven't, we might reconsider having them on our event, because if they're brand new to the webinar technology, that can turn into a cluster pretty fast. And you don't want them messing up your event by basically ruining the technology and doing something that's going to reflect poorly on your company. So this is a really big piece, often overlooked, but very big piece. Training, dry runs, practice sessions, and content preview. Always do that with your speakers. And also when you're vetting speakers, it's always a fair question to ask, have you done webinars before? If so, what platforms have you done them on? Because you want to make sure that they're comfortable with that technology. And then finally, before I give it over to Matt for him to take over on webinar promotion, after it's all put together, you're going to want to come up with a timeline. And this is a sample timeline that we have that we kind of go by. 6 to 8 weeks out prior, that's when you're developing the plan. That's when you start talking about, hey, I think we want to have a webinar in 2 months. 6 weeks prior, you should have finalized everything, the event, the topic, the title, the abstract. As part of the event plan, that's when you also want to start talking about the objectives, the processes, the technologies, all that kind of stuff. And then once you have that, then you can go out and get the topic, the title, the abstract, and the speaker. So your objectives come first, the process comes first, and then everything falls in line. 2 weeks out, we like to do the email invites, and we'll send reminders. And this is, I've seen companies send 5, 6 reminders for the event. I've seen some companies send a reminder 10 minutes before the event. I've seen some companies send a reminder an hour, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, and in the subject line it says 1 hour before your event, 30 minutes before your event, 10 minutes before your event. Whatever you need to do to drive the most attendance without annoying your registrants is really what you should do. And I would suggest playing with your reminders. We do I think we do a week out and then a day before. That's what we do. And we found that works best for us. But you should play with your audience and see what kind of email cadence they like, and play with it a little bit and just make sure you're tracking the impact on attendance. And then, of course, we like everyone to log into the conference 30 minutes before all the speakers, because we want to do a sound check, any last minute looking at the content, any last minute updates on the slide, make sure everyone's there on time, ready to go. And then after the event, you want your follow-up emails to go out. We kind of split ours up into 2 separate follow-ups. One we consider as basic communication, and that happens nearly immediately after the event. And you'll get a thanks for attending or sorry we missed your email. You'll get that immediately. And that is it's basically communicating that the event's over, and the slide deck is in there if there's a slide deck, if we promise that, and the recording to the webinar is in there if we promise that. And that's basically just to get the basic communication out of the way. Then 3 or 4 days later, 1, 2, 3, 4 days later, you might get another email from the marketing department that's segmented a little bit more tightly, and that's meant to drive more demand. So for instance, we might look at everyone that attended and say, you know what, this was a marketing webinar, so we're going to target marketing titles, manager and above. So we might segment that registration list and send out a very, very highly targeted, dedicated blast to that group of people that tries to drive them to a free trial or a live demo. Now, everyone got the post-event email with the recording and the content, but only a segment might get this. We call it the prospecting email. And a lot of times we might do things like top 5 takeaways from yesterday's event, or 3 things learned, or 4 best Q&A questions. And those are also good blog posts as well. So we'll do that kind of stuff. So this is an example timeline. You can play with it, but at the very least, you do want to start planning 8 weeks out. But in terms of when you send the email invite and when the reminders come, really I suggest you play with that. So with that said, we went over the process, the content, and the technology. That brings you up to your day of the event, or up to when you want to start promoting it. Then I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and Matt's going to go talk about how to promote it and bring it to the day of the event. So go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Mike. Can everybody hear me all right? So what we're going to talk about a little bit about the promotion of the webinar. So getting into the type of promotion, really back to the comment that Mike had earlier, it's all going to go back to your objective. So depending on what your webinar's goal is or what the objective is really going to depend on that you get into. So if we look at a couple of the different webinars, one being there's a lot of different ways to promote a webinar. Hopefully you guys have a lot of different cross-channel marketing going currently. Different types of businesses use social, email, paid search, natural search. You can have call campaigns. So really have your goal defined, and then that will really give you a good idea of what type of promotion you guys should be doing. And if you are doing demand generation, depending on the scope or the size of your webinar, it might be very feasible to have people do a telephone call to invite people to the webinar. If it's very specific to a very specific segment of your database, that is a really positive and very powerful way to invite. Anytime you have a personal invite to anything, it's always much more powerful than just an email. So you can consider that as part of your promotion. So let's look at a couple of the different types of things inside of the promotion field. When you're promoting your webinar, you need to be driving people to some type of a registration. So if you are doing paid search, a really good paid search call to action is register for a webinar. A lot of people are also very helpful as well. When you're doing that, setting that up inside of Google, make sure that you have that time-based and very targeted for where you want to have that webinar in. Also, when you are working with email would be a good follow-up to different nurtured through. You also can have that email be automated registration through the form as well as other different types of pieces and formats. Now, when somebody does registering for that, when someone goes to register for that, you need a landing page and all those different things. You can set these up in whether you're using your marketing to create your landing page and form. You might be using a different type of form technology. You might have your website. You might have that set up through the webinar platform. A lot of these platforms allow for forms to be set up. Depends on kind of what you're wanting to do. Again, if you were doing an event, it's easy for somebody to register, and also giving a little bit about what the webinar is about and giving a little bit more information about what everything is for. So back to Mike's comment, making it very clear what they're registering for. So you want to kind of have a couple of different ideas and very clear and concise. Is when you are driving somebody to the landing page, there's a lot of real estate that you have available to do any other type of promotion for what you're talking about. Demand generation, throwing it into some other, putting in any type of comments or any type of quotes, anything you'd like, promotion of that, just kind of for the brand. So those are really good things to use as well. Also, what you'll notice is on the form is the forms, varying lengths of the forms. If you're running this through your marketing automation system, you have the concept of progressive profiling, which allows your registration.
Matthew, this is Simone. I'm just going to jump in. Sorry, I'm going to jump in really quick. We're hearing a lot of fade in and out from your side. Are you dialed in on a landline?
No, I can if I need to. I was on VoIP, so I'll dial in if I need to. Should I do that?
Okay, even if you're maybe on a cell also, that would be helpful. It's just kind of blurbing in and out, and we're kind of missing some of your content, so I just don't want to make it worth your while and make sure our audience can hear also.
All right, well, I'll dial in from the cell real quick.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everybody. Give us 1 second, and we'll get back to that.
No problem. Thanks, everybody, for staying by. We're just going to have him join on a different audio bridge so everybody gets the most of the content.
And go ahead.
All right, great. So hopefully everyone can hear me a little bit better now. So we'll continue. So talking about the form and the landing page. So when you are on, when you're looking at the form and landing page, once again, there's plenty of real estate to advertise other things. Also, you always want to keep in mind your goal. Now, this is a really big thing, especially if you're talking about demand generation. If somebody's registering for a webinar and your goal is to generate more leads, what we want to have happen is we want to have as many conversions as possible from a marketing angle. So if they're registering for a webinar, there's an interest there. Let's make sure that we keep that interest and keep driving that interest home. Let's get into looking at where are they in the lead life cycle. What you also have to remember is when you're tying webinars together into your larger marketing scope, there's a lot of other pieces that you can obtain. These forms that people are filling out very easily can be tied into a marketing automation platform. So when we did the poll, we noticed that there were a lot of people using, we have a couple using Eloqua, a couple using Pardot, and somebody using HubSpot. All of those different platforms allow for that when somebody fills out a form that you can now start tracking behavioral information on those individuals. So when you're going and you're promoting these webinars, don't forget that just the registration of the form is not the end, right? Let's keep promoting other things. Let's have an autoresponder email, which we'll talk about in just a second. Let's promote some other content. So we really want to look at a lot of different things. The other big piece of your form and your landing page when somebody converts is a thank you page. This is once again a lot of other real estate for you to utilize. Now there's a couple of different concepts. One of those is called the concept of yes, and it's a sales concept, right? So if you guys have ever, and I believe a lot of you probably have sales teams, or you've probably been in a sales cycle before, but the general concept is if a prospect is saying yes, they're more likely to say yes again. So if somebody's converting on your form to sign up for a webinar, you've obviously have something of value for that individual because they're going to have to register. So for somebody to fill out a form, there needs to be some value behind that for them to fill out that information. So when they're doing that and you're sending them into a thank you page, make sure that content on that thank you page is consistent, also offering them different pieces of information. Now if the webinar would be for training, thought leadership, any of those aspects, training specifically, you might want to have links to your help sites, links to FAQs, different things that might be able to benefit them based on the thing that they're interested in. If it's demand generation, you also might want to keep in mind of what level this webinar is for. Let's go back to that primary objective. If the demand is for generating demand, what level of demand? So what is this webinar targeted to in terms of our marketing mix, right? If you look at your prospect base and kind of break those down into stages, such as, is this webinar for people who have no idea what this technology is about and trying to educate them? Is the webinar to the demographic inside of our database who is familiar with this type of technology but is not necessarily in a purchasing time frame yet? Or is this webinar to people who are probably looking at purchasing sometime soon? Making sure that webinar content is mapped to that, as well as in your thank you page and your thank you content is mapped to that as well. So if this is a webinar that is going to try to attract people that might not have been considering or that this might be new for them, you might want to have some thank you content that says, here's some other things you might be interested in. This is another place, like Mike said, is let's give them some more content. Following up from the webinar, we're going to be giving them a lot of content, but we want to have as many engagements with that person as possible, especially if it's from a demand generation standpoint. The more engagements that you have with an individual allows you to take the thought leadership role. The person with the most thought leadership generally is going to have the best opportunity to close that business. So you want to use all of these different pieces and parts, such as the landing page, the thank you page, as really other parts to your webinar you need to consider of optimizing these for the goal in mind, whatever that webinar might be. So those are a couple of the pieces for the promotion. Now let's also look at the invitation email. So we talked about there's a lot of different ways to get people to a webinar. You could use paid search to drive people to a webinar. You could use a call campaign. You could use email blast. The invitation email that we're looking at on the screen is an email blast that we would send out to a demographic, a segment of our database, inviting people to this webinar. If you notice, it also has two webinars inside of there. There's one webinar that will be coming up shortly and then another webinar in the future. This is a technique where we allow this is what we're using. We're using webinars to drive demand, but we're also allowing people to segment themselves into different interest groups, such as what piece of this technology interests them. What is the use case for this technology? So we can really get very granular with our marketing to increase that demand flow. And really, like Mike said, we really want to drive quality leads if you're talking about demand generation. So that's kind of the focus. If you're doing training, this might be a great use case to suggest different types of training. Especially, you guys are going to have a lot of data, such as you probably know the #1 training sessions. You probably know the things that people have the most interest in or people have the most need for. This allows you to then say, hey, if you're looking at this type of training, this also might be helpful. So there's a lot of really easy ways to get into a much deeper engagement with your prospects, with your database, and using webinars as the key, but then making sure that our full marketing mix is following along with that to really further whatever our overall objective might be for this piece of marketing. Now, another thing we'll look at is other ways to promote. There's a lot of really cool pieces of technology that you guys can utilize to help cross-promote your webinars. What you see on the screen is something called the Hello Bar. This is a tool, and it's an actual tool called the Hello Bar. It allows you to put a bar on your site, which will go up on the top of the page and can run special promotions. We use this specifically for promoting webinars and content on the Pardot site. So if you were to go to Pardot.com, you would see the Hello Bar, which would be a blue bar across the top of the screen, which would then be promoting the next webinar that we have coming up. So that's one of the other ways that you can use to promote. Now, once again, if it's on your site, you need to already have somebody coming to your site to engage with that. So it really just depends on what you guys are doing to get somebody to your site. That's another really easy way to engage with your client base. Don't forget that you can use the Hello Bar in a lot of different places. If you guys have a technology that has a login page, you can use the Hello Bar on those pages for training webinars, things of that nature. So really kind of get creative with where you're promoting it. The biggest part to promotion is just to be very specific, like Mike said, be very clear on what you're going to be promoting, and then be very specific with who you target that to. Do some research into what is the #1 thing these people might be interested in. That also goes back into choosing your speaker, like Mike said. Make sure your speaker is going to fit into that. So really, a lot of the promotion rolls up into what is the objective, where is the best medium to promote. If you kind of boil it down, you're really going to look at a couple high levels. You've got some inbound, such as if you want to do paid search. You've got social, which allows you to push your message out to say, here's something that we're going to be doing, here's the topic. You've got email and calls that you can do outbound as well. And then you've got inbound places, such as if people are coming to a central site, to a login page, those other places. You've got a lot of different places there, or a lot of real estate, where you can use tools like Hello Bar, and you can use sidebars on your site and things of that nature. Now let's talk a little bit more about the follow-up. So when you're following up from the webinar, there's a lot of things that you can do to then get more run out of this webinar. Mike talked about following up directly with the individual and sending that email out. And we can see a good email right here, which would be, here's the email that you might see following up from a Pardot webinar. Here's the recording. Also, once again, we're advertising another webinar inside of there. This is because the purpose of a lot of our webinars is demand generation. So anytime that somebody registers for one webinar, we're going back to that concept of yes. Let's keep them engaging with us as much as possible. Why? Because with a tool like Marketing Automation, you can start to learn what their interests are. We can start to use that as qualification. So now we know exactly and specifically when they might be ready, or what other pieces of content we need to get into their hands to help get them into that sales-ready state. Now, also, when you have that webinar, there's a lot of things you can do with that webinar. You can put that on your blog. Just like Mike said, there's a lot of good use cases to really getting a lot of run out of a webinar. Webinars are one of my really favorite pieces of content for demand generation. It's because we live in a world where we love television, we love video, and the other big thing is everyone likes to take a little break from their job and watch a webinar. There's a lot of people on this webinar, and I'm sure you're probably doing a little bit of work, but this is hopefully enjoyable and educational. So it allows you to kind of take a little bit of break, learn something, be better at your job, but then you can also then, post on your blog later on. These are great to use in nurturing campaigns, these recorded webinars. They're great to use in demand campaigns. So make sure you're fully utilizing a webinar for a lot of different pieces. Another place, once you've got that recording, post it, share it, put it on Facebook, YouTube, SlideShare, Vimeo, whatever platforms you guys utilize, make sure you put this out there. The recording is a recording. You can use it for a lifetime. And so you should be recording all of your webinars, keeping those, promoting those on different SlideShares, different events of that nature. Also, get social with it. Ask your people that are on the webinars to be social with it. You know, if you have really good content and you have a really good speaker, this makes this very easy for people to share, right? And that's the whole point, is we want to produce a really high-level webinar that allows for a lot of engagement, not only during the webinar, but post-webinar, right? So you want to have a great promotion to drive people there. You want to have a great presentation that's being put on, and then you're going to be able to use that content for a long time into the future. And that's really why I feel that webinars are such a great platform for marketing. It's because not only do you get a great event, it's timely, it's relevant. You guys all get to engage with me and Mike in real time, but also then we have this recorded to then share in the future and really get a large run out of the work that we've had. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over, and we're going to turn it over to Simone and open it up for any type of questions that might come in. And me and Mike will be able to help out in answering any of those.
Sure. So to answer some of the questions that have come in from our audience, as a reminder, it is being recorded, so you guys do get the recording of today's presentation to go back and run through the slides, listen to the recording again. So that will be coming out later on this afternoon, so keep an eye out for that. So a couple of questions that I think would be beneficial for everybody to hear here are, one was, how long, and we covered this a little bit back in the timeline slide that Mike had initially put up, but maybe we can just reiterate it, and Mike just kind of stress what those important, I guess, due dates or timelines are. How long would you say the entire webinar process is going to take, from planning to the live event to follow up? You know, a couple weeks, a whole quarter, and again, it's that 6 to 8 week time frame, and we find that very true here at ReadyTalk as well when we put on our webinar series. But maybe you have additional, either Matt or Mike, additional advice on what is maybe part of the most important part of that planning process. Where would you emphasize maybe all hands on deck if possible?
Yes, so just to expand upon that a little bit, you know, you could look at a webinar and say it never ends, because at the end of the event you're going to take that recording and you're going to chop it up and you're going to use it in your content outreach for the rest of the year, maybe next year until it gets old. You're going to use it in blogs. You're going to give it to the sales guys. You're going to maybe write white papers about it. You're going to write data sheets about it. So really you want to look at webinars as a piece of content. You paid a lot for it. You put a lot of time into it. Why not get the most out of it? So you could look at it like that and say, you know, a webinar never really ends, because you're going to use that content forever, or until it gets stale. Another way to look at it is here at ReadyTalk, you know, we like to use the webinar as an anchor event, or an anchor campaign, and then you have all these other kind of activities going around the webinar. So, for instance, we did a Salesforce Dreamforce campaign. I think probably everyone did, to prepare for Dreamforce, and we started it in May. And we had emails going out. We had content being written. We had sales guys calling lists and sending out their own text emails. Then it all led up to a webinar. Drove attendance at that webinar. And then at the end of the webinar, you know, it didn't just end. You know, we then did follow-up. We went to Dreamforce. We met people at Dreamforce. We came back from Dreamforce. You know, so while we did start planning that event 8 weeks out, we knew we were going to have that event a couple of months, 3-4 months before we even had to start planning it. So that's one way to look at it. If I was going to look at the key points in this timeline, obviously 8 weeks out, objectives, metrics, process, technology. That's a must-have. The earlier you get the topic and the event and the speaker finalized, the better. It doesn't have to be 6 weeks out, but you're basically crunching that timeline the longer it takes. So really, you want to get ahead of it. You want to get ahead of it at the beginning by getting those things settled. And I'm sure Matt, if you want to add to that, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, it really all is going to go back to the objectives, right? Well, so there's different types of webinars. If you have also, and we're talking about speakers, don't neglect your internal resources. You have a lot of people who are probably experts in what you do internally, who can do these types of, such as myself and Mike. Both of us work for the companies Pardot and ReadyTalk. However, in our spaces, and we're talking because these are things that we do on a daily basis. They didn't have to go out and hunt down a speaker to come in and speak. So you also probably, when you're coming up with your webinar strategy, and I would suggest you probably have a strategy for this, you can look at what do we want to have happen and when. Like Mike gave the example of that large campaign. On the flip side, you can also have very short, quick campaigns. It really just depends on what's the goal for the webinar. Once you've also run one, you just get, it's very easy to run another. They just get easier and easier and easier as they go. And so it really, I wouldn't imagine it taking a super long time to put these together once you've been doing these a little bit. And also it's going to depend on your goal. If you're running a very, very large campaign, you have a very, very large goal of an audience, it's also going to take a lot longer to get that big goal. If you have a smaller goal of a smaller audience, it shouldn't really take you as near as long to run a much shorter campaign. Also, the time of your webinars can be varied. You can have longer webinars, you can have shorter webinars. Once again, going back to what is the goal that you're trying to accomplish with that.
Yes, all very good points, and to Matt's point of what is your goal for that webinar? Is it a larger audience? Are you trying to, is it some thought leadership? Is it pushing qualified leads? Really those audience sizes are going to vary, but again, if you're planning on trying to promote the webinar and squishing that into a 3-week time frame, that's probably where you're going to run into a little bit of trouble, and that planning can definitely help on that as well. And you actually mentioned something that was a great segue into our next question, Matt. If I'm having a hard time finding, yeah, exactly. If I'm having a hard time finding speakers that aren't maybe just trying to come on my webinar and find something, like I want a thought leader on my webinar. I want somebody that's going to give me some advice in my field, and they're an expertise, or they have expertise on that. Where should I look? What are my resources? You mentioned a great point of that might just be an internal resource that you have great at your company. That's awesome. You're saving potentially some money. You've got people that are working this out on a day-to-day basis. But what other suggestions might you be able to give our audience as far as places that they can look to maybe fill some speaker spots?
Yeah, it's with the internet today, it makes it really, really easy to find great speakers. So you have a lot of resources at your hand. Twitter is your friend. Google is your friend. You can just Google and then find a blog that somebody's talking about. I'm pretty sure you guys all keep up with your industry blogs, your industry analysts, things of that nature. Most writers, most bloggers love, love, love invitations to do webinars. It allows them to expand their reach. It allows them to talk. And also if there are any type of public figure in a space, usually they just enjoy talking about that topic. Sometimes you might have to pay a speaker. Sometimes you might not. It just really depends on the speaker and depends on the level of the speaker. If you're in a smaller industry and you have somebody that writes on your industry topics, usually they can do that for you, and they're more than happy to do that for you because it's mutually beneficial to the both of you. So that's usually something that you can look at. But yes, I would just go out and check anybody that's writing on the topic, look at your industry analysts, look at people that blog in the space, and also internal resources. And the thing, and I can't say enough about internal resources, the thing that we always forget is that we are experts in what we do, even though we don't necessarily think about it. There was a book, I believe, written by Malcolm Gladwell, who says to become an expert, you need to have 10,000 hours into what you do. And then at that point, you become an expert. If you think about that and you work a 6-hour day and you've done that job for 6 years, you're an expert. So, I mean, not even working a full day over 6 years, become an expert. So I was just going to keep those things in mind, but hopefully that's helpful for you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. A couple other ones here I think we can fit in before the end of the hour. We had one come in that says, kind of speaking to Mike and the webinar being an ongoing type event, maybe not just like here's the full span of the 3 months from start to finish webinar, but something that you're going to continue using. And gearing more towards that webinar recording. people that do a lot of webinars, I think this question probably came from one of them. Do you think that people actually sit and listen to an entire webinar recording after the event, or do you maybe have suggestions on how I can break it up to make it more digestible for the people that either didn't show up, or even the people that did, but you want to make that content just more accessible, more than just an hour-long chunk that people are going to be sitting at their desks and multitasking and maybe not catching the full drift of the messaging? What would you say? Matt or Mike, feel free to jump in on this one.
Yeah, go for it, Mike, and I'll hop in.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question, because your instinct is right. People are probably not going to listen to an hour recording, and if they are listening to it, they're most likely double multitasking while they're doing it. So their full attention is not there. So within ReadyTalk, you can actually edit the recording. You can split it into chunks. You can cut it down. You can transcribe it, which we suggest you do. A lot of times when you can see it written out, you can spot the obvious break points and the obvious major points, and you can break those out into 2-minute recordings. I would say anything more than even 5 minutes in my mind is getting a little long. 2 minutes is probably ideal. 1 to 2 minutes is really ideal. And you want to make it a very actionable, very direct snippet. And sometimes the entire webinar doesn't really lend itself well to 2-minute sound bites. Listening to this webinar, it might be hard to pull out a 2-minute sound bite that actually makes sense, because we're blending things into each other. So that's why transcribing it is really nice. And then what you can do is you can then transcribe it, you can blog post it, you can white paper it, you can data sheet it, you can put tweets out on it, you can post on your Facebook page, all that kind of stuff. But you're right, I would break that down. Really, the only time we use the hour recording is when we send it out at the end of the event. So you'll get the full recording at the end of this event, and then also we'll post it on our archive page on our website. We also have tools that allow you to see how long someone has listened to it, so you can start getting a feel for how long are people listening to this hour recording. Is it mostly 20 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? And then you can start getting a feel for your audience and how they like to digest the media that you're giving them, because it's probably all over the place. I can imagine the marketing crowd who's always multitasking probably doesn't have 30 minutes to sit down and watch something end to end, but I'll certainly watch a 2-minute bit. As marketers, we're really into top 5 benefits, top 10 things, 5 things, 4 things, 3 things. We like that kind of stuff easily. But our IT department, my IT director, he might actually like to sit down and listen to a very, very in-depth 45-minute, hour discussion of technology. So it really depends upon your audience and what you want to break that up into. Just to let you know that you should have, most services should provide tools for you to break that up, and to also think beyond just the recording. Could it be a blog? Could it be a tweet? Could it be on our Facebook page, LinkedIn? Could we write a white paper out of it, and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, a lot of the things we're talking about here are use cases for demand generation. So, in the case of demand generation, it always goes back to being relevant. And just like Mike says, make sure you break it down into relevant pieces. Also, what you can use with those pieces, another thing is put them into a nurturing campaign. If you know somebody has an interest in something that you've identified through either the content that they've downloaded or previous things, you can build out a nurturing campaign that just sends those small sound bites or pieces throughout time, over a timeline. So there's a lot of different ways to use it. But yeah, I would agree that breaking it up is the best use case, and then also making sure that those segments are very specific to the person's point of interest at time.
Great. I think both very fitting answers for the question. Hope it gives you guys some additional ideas of what you can do with your content after it's been created. It looks like we are at the top of the hour here, so we're going to be respectful of your guys' day and time. Thank you again so much for joining us this afternoon. Again, the recording will be coming out later this afternoon, so feel free to review it, re-listen to it. We'll attach a PDF of the slides as well. So thank you again to both our speakers, Mike and Matthew, for taking some time to share their expertise on this subject. And any closing remarks from either of you two?
Thanks for everyone for showing up.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your time.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Have an awesome afternoon. And if you wouldn't mind, take 1 minute to fill out the post-event survey. We love your feedback. Any additional topics you'd like to learn, questions about ReadyTalk, or Pardot, feel free to just chat yes into the chat feature, and we will follow up with you guys directly. Let us know how we did. We appreciate your time. Have an awesome day. Thanks.